The sound of an ECG monitor beeps steadily in a quiet hospital room. The camera pans across a grey skyline blurred by cold morning fog. A voice speaks softly over the scene. What if your legacy wasn't made of concrete or glass? What if the only way to live on was to be remembered by someone who never knew you before? Autumn rain slid down the wide glass panels of the 39th floor penthouse nestled in downtown Vancouver. The space, filled with Scandinavian minimalism and silence, was the home of Elliot Grant, a 36-year-old architectural prodigy. The once sparkling world he created, green cities, eco-wards, and global fame, now felt muted. Before him lay a report, black letters on white pages. Diagnosis: grade 4, glioblastoma. Prognosis: 12 to 18 months. He didn't cry, he didn't rage, he simply froze. But a single burning thought consumed him. I'll die, and no one will remember me. He had no wife, no family, no heir. The world would forget Elliot Grant, just like it forgets old buildings replaced by new ones. Across the room lay a massive, unfinished blueprint, a plan for a sustainable shelter system designed for underprivileged women and children. It had remained untouched for weeks. Elliot stared at it, his hand trembling. I built cities, but I never built a life. Maybe I can still build one, in someone else. That night, he contacted his legal advisor Gerard and gave him a task. Find me someone, a girl, someone who needs a second chance. I'll give her everything, if she bears my child. In a small, run-down apartment in East Vancouver, Mara Taylor, 24, washed dishes while her 6-year-old brother, Luke, coughed from the bedroom. Their lives had been a downward spiral since their parents died in a car crash. Mara had given up college, dreams, and love to raise her brother. The bills were piling. Luke needed treatment for chronic asthma. Life was slipping through her fingers. That same night, she opened an email titled, "Confidential Opportunity, Life-Changing Agreement." Her heart pounded. Was it a scam, a trick? She almost deleted it. But something made her pause. Days later, Mara found herself sitting across from Gerard in a glass-paneled office atop a skyscraper. "You've been selected," he said. "Not for a job, but a purpose," he explained. A dying billionaire, anonymous for now, wanted a child. Not through love, not through romance, through agreement. In return, Mara would receive full medical care, housing, a trust fund, education for her and her brother, total anonymity, if desired, and $2 million. Post-birth, why me? Mara whispered. "Because you have something money can't buy," Gerard said. "Resilience, empathy, grace." She had 72 hours to decide. That night, Mara sat by her sleeping brother, watching the rise and fall of his chest. The words echoed in her mind. A child, a legacy, a deal with a man she hadn't met. But was it just about money? Or was she being chosen for something bigger? She whispered into the night, "What if this isn't just his second chance, but mine too?" She said yes. But what she didn't know was, this child would change everything, not just his legacy, but her own future in ways no one could have predicted. She said yes, not because she wasn't scared, not because she understood it all, but because something deep inside her whispered, this might be your only door out. 3 weeks passed like fog, quiet, cautious, unreal. A team of doctors visited Mara in a private clinic, each one careful, professional, never revealing the identity of the man behind it all. She was poked, scanned, and questioned. Physically, she was perfect. Emotionally, she wasn't sure. One rainy morning, she was told she would finally meet the man who had rewritten the course of her life with one signature. When the elevator doors opened on the 39th floor, Mara felt her breath catch. Everything smelled like new paper and wood polish. Glass walls opened the room to the sky. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a story unfinished. He stood by the window, thinner than she expected, older in the eyes than in the face. He turned slowly. "Hello, Mara," Elliot said. She expected arrogance, maybe cold detachment, but what she saw instead was quiet. A tired man, not of the body, but of the soul. His voice was calm, almost hesitant, as if she were the one with the power. "I thought it was time you met the person who might carry my last hope." She didn't know what to say. "I have a condition," he added, breaking the pause. "If you choose to walk away, you'll still be compensated. But if you stay, you have to be willing to be part of something bigger than a transaction." Mara frowned. Bigger. I want to leave behind more than wealth. I want to build something human. I've spent my life building futures for cities. I forgot to build one for myself. If this child is born, I want him more, her to know more than my name. I want them to know you, who you are, why you chose to do this. Mara sat down slowly. You want me to be part of the story. I want the child to be loved, even if I'm not here. A silence settled between them, but it wasn't awkward. It was raw, like two strangers holding a thread neither could see, yet both felt. Days turned 2 weeks. Medical preparations began. Paperwork followed, but so did conversations. Mara would visit the penthouse often, not because she had to, but because Elliot insisted she be more than a carrier. He wanted her thoughts, her stories, her favorite music, her childhood fears. In return, he told her things no one else knew. About the first time he was mocked for dreaming too big. About the woman he loved once and let slip away because he chose ambition. About how the empire he built made him admired, but also completely alone. Sometimes, when she left, she would find herself thinking of his words long after the elevator doors shut. Then came the day everything became real. A quiet evening, a test result, positive. Mara sat in a private room, blinking at the nurse's words. Pregnant. She thought she'd feel fear, but strangely, she felt peace, like a storm had passed and left something still and whole behind. When she told Elliot, he simply nodded. Then, for the first time, tears gathered at the corners of his eyes. I never thought I'd live long enough to see this moment, he said. You will, Mara whispered, without knowing why. Maybe she believed it. Maybe she just needed him, too. But what neither of them expected was what happened next. In the weeks that followed, Elliot began to change. Subtly, quietly, he asked Gerard to restart the women's shelter project, the one he abandoned months ago. He arranged for Mara's brother Luke to attend a private school with full support. He sat with her through ultrasound appointments, even as he fought off migraines and exhaustion. One afternoon, Mara brought him a small, worn notebook. My mom used to write letters to me in this. I think you should do the same. For the baby. He took it like it was made of gold. Each day, he wrote a page, a memory, a lesson, a truth. He poured his soul into that notebook, like he was planting seeds he'd never get to see bloom. But one night, Mara entered the penthouse and found it quiet, too quiet. She called his name, no answer. Then she saw the note on the kitchen counter, 3 words, written in his handwriting. I need air. Panic gripped her. She called Gerard, called security. Nothing. An hour later they found Elliot in the greenhouse on the roof, slumped over, weak, but smiling faintly. I wanted to feel something alive, he said, before I forget what it means. That moment shook Mara more than she wanted to admit. She realized then, this wasn't just a transaction. This was a countdown, a clock ticking, not just toward birth, but toward goodbye. But she made a decision that night, one she hadn't voiced, even to herself. She wouldn't let him fade away without a trace. She would carry the child, but also carry his story, because somewhere in this strange, painful, beautiful twist of fate, he had become more than a dying man. He had become the beginning of something worth saving, and what they didn't know yet, what none of them could have imagined, was that this child would not only change both their lives, but the world beyond them. The first flutter of movement inside her belly came on a Sunday morning. It was faint like the whisper of wings against paper, but unmistakably real. Mara froze mid-step, one hand resting over the gentle curve that had started to grow. Her heart stopped, then raced. She wasn't imagining it. There was a life inside her now, a part of her and him. She thought about calling Elliot, but he had a treatment scheduled that morning, and she didn't want to disturb him. Still, she scribbled the moment down in the notebook they now shared, tucked between his letters and her thoughts. Later that day, she visited him in the rooftop greenhouse where he spent more and more of his time lately. The space had become his sanctuary. Lavender and lemon balm spilled from raised beds. Tomatoes hung heavy from vines. He looked pale that day, thinner, but his eyes still lit up when he saw her. He moved, she said. Elliot blinked, then smiled. Just a guess. She laughed, though something in her told her it might be right. He reached out, gently touching the side of her belly, so cautious, like she might vanish if he moved too quickly. I used to think cities were the most complex things on earth, he whispered. But this is architecture I'll never understand. Their visits became ritual. Each week, she read to him from books she remembered loving as a child. Each day, he added more pages to his legacy notebook. Sometimes, they just sat together, not talking, listening to the soft hum of the hydroponics and the world outside. Silence with him had become comforting, like music without sound. But the rest of the world was shifting. News broke about Elliot's recent $25 million donation to the new shelter project, and reporters began circling. Rumors spread. Investors speculated. People wanted answers. Gerard warned him, "You're drawing attention. Let them watch." Elliot replied, "Maybe they'll finally see the man I should have been all along." Mara worried, not for herself, but for him. His face grew sharper. His voice, some days, came in whispers, but he refused to give in. One afternoon, as the sky burned gold outside the glass walls, Elliot handed her an envelope. "What's this?" she asked. "My will. I want you to read it." She hesitated. "Why now?" "Because I don't want there to be any surprises. When the time comes, you'll be the guardian of everything. The estate, the foundation, and our son." Mara froze. "You trust me with all of that?" "I trust you with more than that. I trust you with the only thing I've ever created that matters." She opened the envelope with shaking hands. There it was, in ink and legal language, proof that this wasn't just about biology. It was about legacy, about belief, about family one created not by blood, but by choice. But fate, as it often does, doesn't wait for permission. Late one night, Gerard called her. "You need to come, now." She didn't ask questions. She ran. The hospital was cold and bright. Machines beeped. Nurses moved quickly. Elliot lay in a private room, eyes half closed, his breathing shallow. A seizure, they said. A warning sign. His time was shortening. She sat by his bed, her hand wrapped around his. "You're not leaving," she said softly. "Not yet." His eyes fluttered open, a tired smile. "Still bossy," he murmured. "You promised you'd be here to hold him." He gave a faint nod. "I'm trying." That night, she read to him until he fell asleep. Then she wrote in the notebook words she hadn't expected to write. "You've become more than I ever imagined. Not just to the child growing inside me, but to me. You made me believe in something again. And I swear, if you can't stay to see him grow, I will make sure he knows everything." What neither of them knew was that something else had already started. The next morning, the hospital called Mara in for a routine checkup. She didn't feel any different, but the doctor's eyes widened slightly during the scan. "You might want to sit down," he said. "It looks like you're not carrying one child, you're carrying two." She stared at the screen. Two heartbeats, twins. Her mind raced. How would she tell him? Would he be strong enough to hear it? Would it give him hope, or break him? Back at the hospital, Elliot stirred as she entered. "I have news," she said, breathless. "Tell me," he whispered. She leaned in close, smiled. "You're going to be a father, twice over." His eyes welled up. He laughed, a weak sound, but real. "I always said I wanted to build something lasting," he said. "Guess I was aiming too small." But the truth was, the story was growing faster than any of them expected. Two lives forming in the shadow of one, slowly fading. A woman once forgotten, now chosen. A man once destined to be erased, now unforgettable. And as winter rolled in outside, as snow softened the world, and time ticked like a quiet metronome, one thing became clear. This was no longer just a story of goodbye. It was the beginning of something much greater. Something louder than grief, stronger than fate, more powerful than wealth or reputation. Something called legacy, and love, and the fierce, unstoppable will to be remembered, not by the world, but by the hearts we leave behind. Snow began falling gently the night Elliot asked her to name them. They were sitting in the greenhouse again, his sanctuary, in the sky surrounded by the faint scent of rosemary and mint. Outside, the city looked like a snow globe, still, quiet, peaceful in a way that didn't quite match the urgency inside Mara's heart. He looked weaker now. His hands, once steady with blueprints and designs, trembled as he held his tea, but his voice still carried weight. "If something happens to me," he said softly, "I want you to choose their names, names that mean something, names that carry us both forward." She didn't reply at first. Instead, she watched him. The man who was once just a contract had become the person who'd changed everything. "I've been thinking about that," she whispered. "I thought maybe Elias for the boy. It means the Lord is my God in Hebrew, but it also sounds like you." He smiled, eyes closing. Elias Grant, that's strong. And for the girl? Mara hesitated, then smiled faintly. Amara, it means grace. And it holds my name, too. He opened his eyes again, looked at her with something so gentle it almost broke. Her, Amara and Elias, he repeated. They sound like light. The next day, Elliot began dictating letters to his children, one for each birthday, until they turned 20-1. He insisted on handwriting the first few, even though it exhausted him. The ink often smudged, and his words slanted at the end, but he refused help. These are the only conversations I'll ever have with them, he said. I want them to hear my voice in every word. Mara watched, holding back tears. She wished she could freeze time, not for her sake, but for his. Every breath he took felt like it was borrowed from a future he wouldn't get to see. But life, even in its harshest moments, had a strange way of surprising her. A journalist called the foundation one morning. He had tracked down details about Elliot's condition and asked for a statement. Gerard handled it swiftly, but the story broke within hours. Headlines flooded the internet. Billionaire architect battling terminal illness, leaves entire fortune to unborn children's secret pregnancy. At center of Elliot Grant's legacy plan, paparazzi followed her. Neighbors whispered. Reporters camped outside clinics. The quiet sanctuary she had shared with Elliot now felt invaded. And through it all, Elliot's health continued to decline, but he refused to be hidden away. He released a video to the press. Simple, just him sitting in a sunlit chair. In it, he spoke not about death, but about life. He told the world about second chances, about building legacies, not in concrete, but in kindness. He spoke of Mara not by name, but as the woman who gave my story meaning. And he ended with words that would be quoted around the world. I spent my life designing cities that touched the sky, but only now, in my final chapter, have I learned that the tallest things we build are the lives we shape in others. The video went viral, not because he was rich, not because he was dying, but because his words were real. Strangers sent letters. People donated to the shelter project in record numbers. Schools began reading his letters aloud. Elliot, once known for blueprints, was now remembered for something far greater, and yet, he was fading. One night, Mara woke up to pain. Sharp, sudden, undeniable. Gerard rushed her to the hospital. It was too soon. She was only 33 weeks, but the twins were coming. She tried to breathe, to stay calm, but all she could think of was Elliot. He wasn't there. He didn't even know. Hours passed in a blur of lights and voices. Then, finally, cries, two of them, small, fierce, alive. She held them both, one in each arm. Elias, Amara, tiny, warm, perfect. And then she asked to call Elliot. He was already at the hospital. He had insisted, despite the pain, despite everything. Gerard wheeled him into the room moments later, pale but determined. When he saw the babies, he didn't speak at first. He just wept. Mara placed Elias into his arms. The baby stirred, opened his eyes. Elliot looked at him for a long time, then kissed his forehead. I thought I'd never see this, he whispered. But now that I have, I can go whenever I'm called. Mara shook her head. No, stay, just a little longer. And he did. Days passed. They were gentle days, full of soft light, slow moments, tiny breaths. Elliot held them every chance he got. He wrote one final entry in the notebook, just 3 words, scribbled in unsteady handwriting beneath a drawing of a small house. You are loved. He died. A week later, peacefully, quietly, in his sleep, with Mara and the twins in the room beside him. The world mourned, but Mara, she didn't just mourn a man. She carried a story. One she would one day tell Elias and Amara. Not about a billionaire, not about a dying man, but about someone who dared to change his ending, who took the last pages of his life and rewrote them with grace, purpose, and love. And she knew the story wasn't over. It was only just beginning. 3 years later, Elias took his first step toward a mural of his father's face. It was painted on the wall of a public library, built with Elliot's final donation, a towering image of him looking skyward, surrounded by buildings he'd once designed and phrases from his last video that had become a kind of public scripture. Mara knelt a few feet behind her son, watching in quiet awe as Elias toddled forward, chubby legs uncertain, hands reaching. He didn't know the man on the wall was the same man whose voice she played to him every night, but somehow he always stopped and stared, like he felt something, like he knew. Amara, meanwhile, stood by Mara's side, clutching a wooden block, toy shaped like a tree. Unlike her brother, she was observant, watchful, in a way that felt almost beyond her age. Sometimes she would place her tiny palm against the mural's stone base, and whisper words only she could understand. Mara often wondered what Elliot would think if he saw them now, how they walked, how they laughed, how they argued over bedtime. Stories she'd memorized every detail of those first few months without him. The aching emptiness of waking up and expecting to find his voice in the next room. But over time, that ache evolved. It didn't fade, it softened, became a rhythm. In the background of their days, and still, he was everywhere. In the letters they opened on birthdays, sealed years before in his elegant handwriting. In the garden she kept thriving on the penthouse rooftop, still sprouting herbs he once planted. In the news articles that continued to call him the architect who rebuilt hearts. But his greatest legacy wasn't in bricks or headlines. It was in Elias' first whispered "Mama, why does the sky have colors?" It was in Amara's habit of sharing her snack with their goldfish every morning. It was in the way both children, without being told, said thank you to the wind when it moved the leaves. One cold autumn morning, a letter arrived at the door. It was embossed with gold foil, bearing the seal of the Grant Foundation's new leadership. Inside was an invitation. Mara Ellison, you are formally invited to the dedication of the Grant Children's Center for Resilient Futures. It is the culmination of Elliot Grant's final vision, a place where young lives, especially those forgotten by society, are given a second chance. We request your presence as guest of honor. Mara stared at the paper for a long time. She had tried to stay behind the scenes, quiet. She'd told herself her job was raising the twins, not standing on stages. But something in her stirred. This wasn't about her. It was about the promise she made, to Elliot, to herself, to the children now giggling in the hallway, wearing mismatched socks and superhero capes. At the opening ceremony, hundreds gathered under string lights in a silver sky. The building was warm, full of music and artwork made by children already living there. There were no speeches from politicians, no corporate slogans, just stories by the children themselves of pain transformed into potential. Mara stood on the small stage, heart pounding. Amara clung to her skirt. Elias held her hand. I was once invisible, she began, voice shaking. No one knew my name. I was living in a basement, working night shifts, surviving. Then someone saw me, not as charity, not as an accident, but as someone worth believing in. She paused, voice thickening. That someone isn't here tonight, but he lives on in this building, in every hand held, every voice raised, and in these two children, beside me, who remind me every day that love is the only legacy that truly lasts. She stepped down to thunderous applause, but it wasn't the clapping that mattered. It was the dozens of children in the audience who came up to hug her. It was the teenage boy who whispered, I thought I'd never matter until I walked into this place. It was the old woman in the crowd, holding a copy of Elliot's memoir, who simply said, he saved lives long after he left. Back at home that night, as the twins fell asleep in their shared room, Mara sat beside the window, watching the moonlight spill across the floor. She opened one of Elliot's final letters, this one sealed until the twins' third birthday. Inside it read, Mara, if you're reading this, they're already becoming more than we ever imagined. I don't know what the world will give them, but I know what you will. Strength, grace, laughter, a reason to believe they belong. Please remind them, when they ask, that I loved them first, even before I knew their names, and you'd thank you for turning my ending into their beginning. Mara didn't cry, not because she wasn't moved, but because the tears had already come and gone, washed away by something stronger, purpose. She looked at the sleeping faces of Amara and Elias, and she knew, this wasn't just a story about a dying man who paid a poor girl to bear his child. It was a story about what happens when strangers become family, when legacy is rewritten in the soft ink of kindness, and when the end becomes a doorway to something brighter, wider, and forever. 10 years after Elliot Grant's final breath, his name echoed through places he never stepped, lives he never touched directly, and futures he never saw. But it wasn't the buildings bearing his name that made him unforgettable. It was the people, especially two of them, Elias and Amara. The story the world knew was one of tragedy turned legacy. A billionaire, once broken by a terminal diagnosis, had found redemption in fatherhood, even if only for a brief flicker of time. But the world didn't know everything. They didn't know the parts of the story that had quietly unfolded in the corners of Mara's world, in laughter-filled kitchens, in whispered dreams before bedtime, in tears cried over milestones missed, and joys found in unexpected places, and they certainly didn't know what was coming. On the morning of their 10th birthday, Elias and Amara received a package neither of them had ever seen before, wrapped in deep green velvet, sealed with wax, and marked with a symbol they recognized only from the mural downtown the stylized G. Eliot had sketched on every blueprint he ever signed. Inside were 2 journals, not ones Eliot had written before his death. Those had already been read, treasured, and tucked safely in the memory boxes Mara kept. These were different, empty, except for the first page of each, where Eliot's handwriting, somehow delicate and steady, bore the same inscription: "This is your beginning. Build your world. Tell your story. Shape your legacy." Elias stared at the words, his fingers tracing the ink. "Did he really write this?" he whispered. Mara nodded slowly. "He left them with Gerard a decade ago. Told him to give them to you when you were ready. I guess this is the moment he hoped for." Later that day, while the candles were blown out and friends gathered for cake, Mara stood back and watched as her children, growing rapidly into their own, carried a weight Eliot never could have predicted, not burden, but brilliance, the kind of purpose that lives in the marrow. Dad Elias wanted to be an inventor. He built models of machines that cleaned the air and purified water using recycled wind turbines. He talked about opening a laboratory for underserved communities, so kids like me and Mum used to be don't have to dream from the outside. Amara, on the other hand, leaned toward people. She volunteered every Saturday at the Grant Center, organizing art therapy for children who had survived neglect and loss. Her paintings, often abstract, were full of color and warmth. One, a swirl of gold and blue and charcoal titled "Before the Light," had been selected for a national exhibit, but what truly stirred something new in Mara was what they did together. One afternoon, the twins asked her to visit the rooftop garden. It was a place they had grown up tending, watering, and defending from city pigeons. But this time, it looked different. At the far end was a stone bench engraved with words: "The tallest things we build are the lives we shape in others." Beside it, 2 saplings stood, one maple, one oak. Their roots were barely planted, but their presence was symbolic. Elias stepped forward, speaking with a quiet confidence that reminded her of Eliot. "We're going to start something new," he said. "A program that helps kids without parents build something from their pain. Not just therapy, not just school. A place where they become more than what they've been through. We're calling it the Legacy Grove," Amara added. "It's not just a center. It's a garden, a studio, a lab, a place to start over." Mara felt a lump rise in her throat. "But you're only 10, she whispered. "We'll grow with it." Elias smiled. "Like you grew with us." That night, Mara stood before the mirror in her room, brushing her hair, and paused as she caught her own reflection. Behind her, on the dresser, sat a framed photo of Eliot holding the twins for the first time. His eyes in the photo were tired, but burning with something that looked a lot like peace. She picked up the photo and whispered, "They're carrying you. You should see them. You'd be so proud." A gentle wind blew in through the open window, flipping the pages of the journal on her desk. They fluttered, then stilled on the final page, still unwritten. The future was open. Months later, Elias and Amara stood on a small wooden stage at the launch of the Legacy Grove. The city's mayor attended. So did educators, activists, and donors, but it was the children in the crowd that made the moment matter. Dozens of them, some shy, some wide-eyed, some still afraid to believe. Elias cleared his throat, and his voice carried across the space. "My dad believed that designing a building wasn't the same as designing a life. He taught us that if we want to change the world, we don't start with money or awards, we start with people, with roots, with second chances." Amara followed, stepping beside him. "Every child here is a story waiting to be told, a voice waiting to be heard. We didn't come from perfection. We came from pain, and love, and hope. This grove is for every life that was almost forgotten, but wasn't." Mara wept silently in the crowd, surrounded by faces she didn't know but who somehow felt like family. Later, after the crowd had cleared and the twilight set in, she stood beneath the growing trees and closed her eyes. In the quiet, she heard it, not a sound, but a sense. Eliot, not gone, not even a memory, but present, alive in every brick, every breath, every dream planted in the soil. The story that began in heartbreak had become a movement, one born not from wealth, or fame, or even time, but from a single, imperfect decision made in the shadow of death, to choose love, to choose life, to believe, even at the edge of an ending, that something beautiful could still begin. And so it had, not just once, but over and over again.